Hi, my friends. Welcome back. We are going to keep reading The Outcasts of 19 Schuyler Place. Once again, I obviously do not own the copyright to this book. I'm reading it out loud purely for educational purposes to share with you, my students, and just to have a good discussion. So last time we read, we got to know a little bit more about Margaret Rose Kane and why she was not really preferring to do anything at camp. She was not really getting along with the other girls. So we are going to read chapters 4 through 6 today, so let's get started. Chapter 4. We were miles past the camp when I asked Uncle Alex, "Do you think Mrs. Kaplan has a narcissistic personality disorder?" "Why do you ask?" "Well, for one thing, a person who suffers from narcissistic personality disorder has a huge sense of self-importance, and Mrs. Kaplan must think she is so important that she is plural. She always says we for I. She does it all the time. There's no one else in the room, but it's we ask, we require, we do not allow, and we want. An awful lot of we want." Uncle chuckled. "I don't know about personality disorders, Margaret. I only know about 3 kinds of we." He settled himself deeper into the car seat and inched himself around so we better faced each other. "First," he said, "there is the real we, the plural. That means I plus others. Then there is the editorial we. News anchors say we a lot. They are speaking for themselves and others. They're bosses at the station, I guess. And finally, there is the royal we. A queen will say, we are not amused. That is Mrs. Kaplan. The woman thinks she is a queen, and you, my dear, are her loyal subject." "Wasn't," I insisted. "I wasn't loyal, and I wasn't her subject. I wasn't her predicate either." Uncle laughed. He had a plump laugh, round and big-bellied. "I wasn't exactly obedient, but I wasn't exactly disobedient either. Not really. Like if someone does not agree with you, they disagree with you. I was something in between being obedient and disobedient. If someone doesn't agree or disagree, what is she? You were what I would call neutral, like shifting gears in a car. When you put it in neutral, you can't go one way or the other, forward or backward. If you're in neutral, you stand still." Uncle seemed to know more about driving cars than people who actually do drive. Even though I was familiar with the term shifting gears and knew what it meant, I'd never actually seen anyone do it. I didn't know how Uncle knew about shifting gears, but I was not about to question him. I simply loved knowing he understood. I said, "That's what I was, standing still, neither obeying nor disobeying." "I think the word for what you were is anobedient, which would mean without obedience, which is not the same thing as disobedience. I would say anobedience is related to words like anesthetic, which means without feeling, or anonymous, which means without a name, or anorexia, without an appetite, or anemia, without blood, or Anne Boleyn, without a head." Uncle laughed out loud. I noticed Jake watching from the rearview mirror. I thought I caught him smiling, but I couldn't be sure because from where I sat, the mirror only showed half his face. On the Sunday that we were scheduled to go tubing on the lake, Gloria did a quick head count on the bus and realized she was 1 camper short. She charged off the bus and headed for Meadowlark Cabin, where she found me fully dressed, lying on my bunk, my head propped up by pillows, leaning against the wall, reading. Gloria told me that if I didn't hurry, the bus would leave without me, and I said that was fine with me, because I preferred not to go. She took a deep breath. "You should have told me." "I did, last night when you were doing paperwork." "I didn't hear. Or you weren't listening." Gloria reported me to Mrs. Kaplan, which led to some more friendly guidance. About an hour after the bus left, Mrs. Kaplan came into Meadowlark. She was carrying a plate of cookies and a container of milk. She found me lying on my bunk, my arms under my head, my foot beating time to Michael Jackson's Thriller on my Walkman. I sat up as soon as she came in. She patted the edge of the lower bunk. "Come, Margaret," she said. "Come sit here so we can have a little chat." She placed the plate of cookies between us. "Help yourself," she said. I took a cookie and said thank you. The little chat went downhill from there. Mrs. Kaplan seemed to take issue with everything I said until I said the one thing that made her so mad she put an abrupt end to the little chat, and her smile dropped so fast it almost made a sound. Her nostrils dilated, and she seemed to vacuum in half the air in the room. Huffing out the syllables of my name, she said, "Margaret Kane." She took a deep breath, this time sucking the air back in through her clenched teeth. "Margaret Kane, we want you to think about the cruel thing you have just said. We want you to think about that very hard, and then we want you to think about what you can do to apologize." She sprang up from the bed as if from a trampoline. The paper plate fell, and the remaining cookie broke into 100 pieces. I sat on Heather's bunk, bouncing ever so slightly from the recoil of the mattress. Mrs. Kaplan looked down on me and the scattered cookie with equal contempt. She said, "You may sweep that up." She paused just a second and added, "Now." She watched as I got the broom and started sweeping. When you've finished here, we would like you to report to the infirmary and see Miss Starr, and we don't want to hear that you prefer not to. Miss Starr was Nurse Louise. I did not like her at all. Except for the fact that she dyed her hair and wore a lab coat, she was just like Mrs. Kaplan. I truly would have preferred not to go there again. As soon as Miss Kaplan left, I began to sing, God save our gracious queen, long live our noble queen, God save the queen. I sang as I swept, and by the time I had finished the 5th verse and had sung the 2nd verse, my favorite, twice, I had swept the entire cabin from wall to wall, paying special attention to the 4 corners. When I was finished, I decided that sweep that up did not also mean pick it up. So I left the mound of crumbs, dust bunnies, and sand in a neat pile at the entrance, propped the broom in a corner by the door, and left for the infirmary. Chapter 5. We were now on a part of the highway that is officially scenic. We were passing markers that explained, in paragraphs that were too long and lettering that was too small, what we should be appreciating. A person would have to be an extremely rapid reader or be in an extremely slow vehicle to be able to make out what they said. I didn't even try. Tartufo sat on the floor, resting his head on the seat between Uncle and me. I stared out the window, thinking that everyone at Talequa had a name for me, but none of them knew me. Even if I would never get a prize from being Miss Congeniality, I didn't deserve incorrigible. Nurse called me incorrigible, Uncle, I said. Uncle lifted my hand and kissed my fingertips. It was an old world thing he did when he approved of me, which was often. I know, he said. I read the report. I didn't know she wrote it, too. By the time I got back to the cabin after seeing Nurse Louise, all the meadowlarks had returned from tubing. The first thing I noticed was the mound of crumbs and dust balls at the threshold was gone, scattered back over the floor of the cabin. The second thing I noticed was that Ashley and Alicia looked incandescent. Then I saw that everyone had a neon glow. Even Blair Patiani, whose skin was a shade of coffee ice cream and who had bragged that she never burned, did. I made my way into the room. Everyone was oddly quiet. When I got to my bunk, I saw why. 1 foot of my bunk ladder was sitting in an ugly pool of vomit. Heather Featherstone, who had the bunk beneath me, was lying on her side with her back to the room. Her back was a luminous shade of raspberry. She was clutching her fringy to her stomach. I asked, "What happened?" Berkeley Sims stepped forward and said, "Maybe you can tell us." "What do you mean?" Ashley exchanged a knowing smile with Berkeley before saying, "That mess was not here when we left, and you were the only one in the cabin." I opened my mouth to answer, but I couldn't speak. I hopped over the lowest rung of the ladder and made my way up to my bunk, holding on to both rails of the ladder so they could not see me shaking. Looking like 2 low-wattage infrared bulbs, Alicia and Blair came over. Stacy and Caitlin joined them, and then, as if a some unspoken signal, the 6 of them formed a semicircle and stood shoulder to shoulder at the foot of the bed, giving as wide a berth to the pool of vomit as the space between the beds allowed. I don't know who said clean it up first. Maybe it was Caitlin, but it could have been Ashley. I looked around from face to face. They returned my stare, and in that brief exchange of looks, I saw it happen. I saw them change from nasty to vicious. Then they linked arms at their shoulders, and with the precision of a line of Radio City Rockettes, they started chanting, "Clean it up! Clean it up! Clean it up!" I was no longer shaking. I was frozen in place. My blind inner self must have told me that they were beyond reason, beyond logic. Anything I could have said, had I been able to speak, would not convince them otherwise. I sat there on my bed and watched them invent their rage. They had become a warrior gang. They needed a victim. Me. They picked up a rhythm. Clean it up, clean it up, clean it up, 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 up. In a groupthink pause between chants, Gloria came in. They shut up and quickly dropped their arms. Gloria assumed the girls were gathered around my bunk out of concern for Heather. "How is she?" the girls asked. She asked. The girls broke up to let Gloria through. She sidestepped the base of the ladder and sat down at the edge of Heather's bed, just where Mrs. Kaplan had sat earlier. She said, "Jake's over in the mess hall. Why don't one of you go tell him what happened? He'll know what to do." Ashley volunteered to go, but not before exchanging a vile smile with Caitlin and Alicia. That evening when Gloria came back to the cabin, I sat up in my bunk and sang God Save the Queen. I sang all 5 verses all the way through and then sang them all the way through again. I was looking out the window, but I was seeing nothing. I was thinking about the 3 kinds of we, the plural we, the editorial we, and the royal we. I could thank my id, the part of my psyche that is totally unconscious, for knowing that Mrs. Kaplan thought she was a queen. My subconscious knew even before I did that the woman thinks she is a royal we. It was my id that instinctively chose God Save the Queen as the song I should sing. I started to hum it. Uncle asked, "What are you singing, Margaret come?" "The same song I sang yesterday." "What song was that?" The British national anthem. I started singing it yesterday afternoon. Later, I sang it sitting up in my bunk. Always the same song? Always God Save the Queen. In a weak tremolo I began, God save our gracious queen, long live our noble queen, God save the queen. Send her victorious, happy and glorious, long to reign over us, God save the queen. Where did you learn that? 6th grade. My language arts teacher was an Anglophile. She made us learn 5 verses. She said there was a 6th, but she didn't like it, so we only learned 5. Listen to the 2nd verse, it's my favorite. O Lord our God, arise, scatter her enemies and make them fall, confound their politics, frustrate their knavish tricks, on thee our hopes we fix, God save us all. Uncle laughed. Very good, he said, and very appropriate. I sang the 2nd verse again, and soon Uncle started humming. By the time I got to the top again, he was singing along. Neither of us had any singing voice to speak of, and Tartuffe reacted by lifting his head and howling. What happened when you sang, Margaret calm? Nothing. The meadowlarks paid no attention at all. I think it's called shunning. All of them except Gloria, my counselor. What did Gloria do? At first she tried to ignore me, but after I had sung it straight through for a 2nd time, she asked me to please stop. Please, Margaret, stop singing that song, she said. And what did you do? I stopped singing, and I started to hum. I hummed and hummed until I came to frustrate their knavish tricks. I sang those words, and then I la-la-la-la'd until I came to God save us all. I sang those words, and then I started humming again. Do you think I was being incorrigible? Incorrigible? I'm not so sure, but irritating, yes. Irritating, I'm very sure. Good, I said, strangely satisfied. And then, as if prompted by a choral director, we sang the first 2 verses all over again. This time, Tartuffe lifted his head and howled as if the moon and not the sun were full and visible. We stopped after singing a 2nd chorus, and Uncle Alex kissed the top of Tartuffe's head, and I did too. And that was the moment when I caught Jake the handyman's reflection in the rearview mirror, and this time, no mistake about it, he was smiling. Definitely smiling. At last, we came to the highway signs that were big enough to read, and they said we were approaching a rest area. Uncle leaned forward and asked the driver to please stop. No problem, Uncle replied, my 2 favorite words. Just before he put on his turn signal to change lanes, Jake the handyman turned half around and smiled directly at me. His smile was slightly mischievous and totally unvarnished. Chapter 6. When I came out of the restroom, Jake was standing in front of the car, holding Tartuffe's leash, smoking a cigar. No genuine Fragile X person could smoke a cigar and looked relaxed at the same time. If it's all right with you, I'll give Tartuffe a little run, I said. He handed me the leash. Take your time, he said. No hurry. He flicked the ash from his cigar with a smooth gesture. I started toward a sign that pointed to a dog run in the back of the rest area and glanced back at Jake. He was leaning against the car hood, a faint, relaxed smile on his face. Someone with Asperger's wouldn't be leaning nonchalantly against the car hood. He'd be banging his head against it. I wondered if there was 2 handymen named Jake at Camp Talequa. One normal, one not. Tartuffe took his time about where to lift his leg, and when I returned to the car, I found Uncle and Jake deep in conversation. Tartuffe lunged towards Uncle, yipping with excitement as if he had not seen him for days. I wondered how dogs measure time. Did they multiply minutes by 7 the way I did at Camp Talequa? I turned the leash over to Uncle and started to open the back door of the car when Jake, between puffs of relighting his cigar, said, No hurry. Who was this man who looked and sounded as if he not only knew what was going on, but was in charge? Then Uncle said, That accident on the highway really slowed us down. Jake caught on right away. He took a deep pull on the cigar, then held it at arm's length and twirled it between his thumb and forefinger while examining it. 3 cars, he declared. He smiled slyly in the direction of the highway where cars were zipping by at the speed of sound. People on the scene said the ambulance was delayed by heavy traffic. He carefully snuffed out his cigar in the sole of his shoe, checked that it was cool, and slipped the rest of it into the bib pocket of his coveralls, which he buttoned closed. Uncle looked over the 6 lanes of moving vehicles. Traffic backed up for hours. It wasn't easy getting the life flight helicopter to land on the site of the accident, Jake said as he reached into the front seat of the car and took out a cooler. Witnesses say that people delayed by the massive traffic jam were led to the best table by a man who was familiar with the territory and that they shared their loaves and tuna fishes. He smiled again. Follow me. We assembled around the table that he led us to. After we were seated, I asked if he had a last name. Kaplan, he replied. I am Jacob Kaplan. Are you her husband? I asked, shocked. Her son. Uncle said, that makes you the heir apparent. Jake laughed, only in a technical sense. It is true that I am the son of the reigning queen, but I am nothing more than an obedient subject. I looked at Uncle, and he looked at me, as if on cue we chorused, an obedient subject? Are you an obedient? Jake shook his head no, and then nodded yes and laughed. I guess I am. We ate slowly, enjoying the shade and the slight breeze that floated across the highway. Jake told us that he had become his mother's handyman when he lost his job as a billboard painter. After so many states passed laws forbidding billboards, especially the big ones like the ones I painted, I was out for work. Mother needed a handyman and I needed a job. I'm a better painter than I am a handyman, but what good is being good at a craft no one wants? Uncle Alex replied, my brother is in a similar situation. Is he a billboard painter? No, he is a watchmaker. Not quite as bad, because there are still some watches that don't run on batteries and people still need repairs. My brother, too, is good at his craft. He is expert at doing fine-tuning and repair work on what he calls timepieces, by which he means clocks and watches that have gears and springs. We have a place, a kiosk at the 5 Mile Creek Mall. Jake Kaplan looked at me and winked. Sooner or later, we all do what we have to do, even if it means fixing plumbing. Uncle and Jake gathered up the wrappings from lunch and walked toward the trash barrel by the side of the walkway. I followed, holding Tartufo's leash. After they dumped the trash, I gave the leash to Uncle and then hung back. I was so happy not to be programmed for walks, talks, arts, crafts that I felt as if I had been given a hall pass. Freer than that. Freer even than the last day of school. I was excused. No more meadowlarks. What a relief! No more powdered milk breakfasts. What a relief! No more crafts on demand or Mother Nature. No more friendly guidance from experienced counselors. No more, no more, no more. I spread my arms eagle wing wide, and then with my fingers splayed, I slowly raised my arms as high as I could, lifted my face to the sky where I directed my thanks. I would soon be at my uncle's house. I would soon be hanging out. I would soon be in the tower garden. I would soon be eating while the meadowlarks had lights out. Yes, I yelled. Yes, yes, yes. I dropped my arms to my sides and twirled around 3 times. 3 times to totally cast out the doom of Talequa. Then I ran to catch up with Uncle and Jake. As we walked to the car, Uncle said, "May I suggest, Mr. Kaplan, that when your car breaks down in Epiphany, you join us for dinner?" Jacob Kaplan said, "I would like that very much." Uncle Alex asked, "Can you tell me whether your mother will be pleased or angry when she discovers that there won't be an auto repair bill?" Jacob beamed 2 bright eyes directly at me and said, "I prefer not to." That's the end of chapter 6, which is where we're going to end for today. So we are getting to know our characters a little bit better. And I think Uncle Alex and maybe even Jake the Handyman sound like people I would like to spend time with. Before I end my video, I do just want to make a little note about something that Margaret talked about in the book. She said that some things about Jake were kind of off, and she was speculating about some different things that she said might be wrong with his brain. And I want to remind you that not only was this book written in 2004, it takes place in the 1980s, and Margaret is just a kid and so isn't super knowledgeable about the world at this time in the story. So I'm very aware that some of the things that she suggests about Jake are outdated and unkind, and definitely not how we speak about people with different disabilities or different abilities today. But I think that it fits in with the story, but if I was gonna edit this book, I would take that out. But I'm not the book editor, I'm just reading it to you. So I just wanted to make a note of that if you know me, you know we don't talk like that about people, but I think Margaret's gonna come around and realize that as well. So thank you guys so much, and make sure you come back tomorrow to read the next couple chapters of this book. Bye.